Oh, hell yeah, it is Witcher time again, folks! Yes, hello interwebs, it is time for my review of the latest Netflix movie release. What am I doing? I don't know what I'm doing. I'm manic today. I don't know why, folks. Hello, interwebs. Today, I'm going to be reviewing the Netflix film movie adaptation thingy of The Witcher: Nightmare of the Wolf, the sort of prequel anime movie that Netflix made. Why is this over here? I'm gonna move you over here, bud. Get over there. This sort of prequel movie that Netflix made in preparation for Witcher Season 2, giving us the backstory of the Witchers, how the Witchers got created, and following the character of Vesemir, a Witcher who existed several years before Geralt and the events of the main Witcher show. I haven't talked about The Witcher much on this channel yet, but I've read several of the books. I watched the first season of the show. I played a little bit of Witcher 3. I haven't played a ton of it, but I really love The Witcher and the Witcher world. It is such an evocative fantasy setting that I really kind of enjoy seeing. It's sort of like a normal fantasy setting, but it has this much more dour, darker, more grittier take on the world. It's such a fascinating place to exist in. It feels more... real isn't the right word, but sort of more grounded in terms of its fantasy setting, and deals a lot more with prejudice and bigotry and hate, while also sort of like taking fairy tales and different like sort of monsters that we know and twisting them in a sort of interesting way. And I've really always appreciated the Witcher setting for that. And while I did not think the first season of the Witcher show was flawless, I think it was structurally very, very weird and very, very strange. I just really liked existing in that setting because I just found it so interesting. And the performances within that first season, specifically Geralt with Superman himself playing the role, it was just very, they're all very, very strong. Witcher is like that weird sort of setting and universe where I'm like, it is, especially in terms of its live action depictions, where it's sort of like, you're not perfect. I see the problems, I see the structural issues within how you're telling the story here, in terms of how it's being adapted for the screen, and yet I still just enjoy being here. It's one of those things that's like, you're messed up and messy, but what happens if I don't enjoy you? Which kind of fits The Witchers just in general as a concept. And honestly, to get to this actual anime prequel movie, that kind of follows through here. This movie, following the character of Vesemir, is messy. It is structurally kind of weird and all over the place. The through-line story of it doesn't necessarily work entirely structurally, and yet I kind of still enjoyed this movie in spite of itself. The character of Vesemir is a very sort of personality strong character. Basically the plot of this sort of movie is we get a sort of present tense plot where Vesemir is sort of a Witcher kind of doing okay for himself. For those of you who don't know, Witchers are sort of like monster hunters within this universe, yet they have a lot of stigma against them, people hating on them. And so he's doing fairly well for himself, but he has to go back to the Witcher stronghold where Witchers are created, where they train young kids to become these sort of monster hunters and sort of do these like weird magic stuff to them. To try and train up these Witchers, because that's like part of what he has to do. At the same time, there's sort of this weird mystery unfolding of these different monsters appearing around the land that don't necessarily fit in with the lore that people know about the monsters. Also, at the same time, on top of that, there is this witch in this area who has a lot of hatred towards Witchers for one reason or another, and she's trying to get people to take down the Witchers, push back against them, and say like, no more Witchers here. We don't want them here. We don't need them here anymore. So all that's going on in the present tense. We also jump back in time to get Vesemir's backstory as a kid and how he fell in with the Witchers and how he became a Witcher and sort of his long-lost love with this young girl that he sort of grew up with, and sort of his sort of like, it's very stereotypical plot. He's like, oh, I fell in love with this girl, but I have to like go join this Witchers to sort of fulfill my destiny sort of thing. It's all very hard. My life sucks, but I still have feelings for her throughout my life. And like I said, structurally, it's very, very weird and strange, and yet I still found myself enjoying it. There are moments throughout this story that honestly really emotionally hit very, very hard, despite the fact that us getting to those moments didn't necessarily always work for me. But when they do have these emotional moments, like for example, when there's a whole sequence in this book, or in this movie, where Vesemir has to work with the witch who wants to take down the Witchers, they have to like work together to try and solve the mystery going on here. There's a couple emotional moments throughout that piece that I was like, oh wow, that was actually written very well. It was performed very well by the voice actors and shown off very well in the visuals that I really felt strongly hit by it. And so I was like, oh, this didn't necessarily work to get here, but the moments that do work really, really well. That also being said, the mystery of what is creating these monsters, very nicely set up. It's not the deepest mystery nor the hardest mystery to solve, but it does give you enough clues throughout it to sort of figure it out before you get there. And when you do get there and get the revelation, you're like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. That fits in with the characterizations of the characters that I've seen so far. It makes sense of why this would be happening this way. And that's something, honestly, having watched a lot of recent movies where the plot doesn't fit all together all that well, I have to commend this for being like, everything tracks and everything works, and it feels satisfying when that revelation gets revealed. However, this does bring me to the things that I kind of have to knock against this movie. The animation doesn't really work for me. It's kind of gray and drab and boring. Some of the action sequences are really cool and clever and well done, but everything just feels sort of like muddy and kind of blah to look at. And that may fit the Witcher world, but it doesn't necessarily make it all that interesting to look at as I sit here and watch the movie, if that makes sense. I think I hate to necessarily draw comparisons to something else, but this movie feels like it has a lot of similar style to the recent Netflix Castlevania adaptation in terms of mood, tone, and even animation style going on here. But Castlevania, while also dark, dreary, and grim, had such a strong sense of style. The cinematography was really beautiful. The colors being evoked were really interesting and fascinating. There was a lot of diversity within that tone, so when the dark stuff was dark, you felt the darkness as opposed to the whole movie kind of being very dark in case of The Witcher. And so it feels like, compared to something like Castlevania, which I also really watched, it seems very similar and a very similar tone and style. This movie doesn't really stand up as well in comparison in terms of just what it's delivering to me on a visual and animation artistry level here, and that has to knock against it too. The second thing, as I said, structurally, this thing feels kind of all over the place. Things sort of jump around, bounce around, and it's kind of hard to get a full track on where this story is exactly heading, and it kind of bounces around a little bit, and so that kind of led to it feeling a little bit weaker in the long run. And then the third thing too is some of the characterization, while good, never really breaks the mold in any particularly unique way. There's a couple characters that do, I think particularly of Vesemir's long-lost love, that we meet throughout in different stages of this story, and I won't spoil how, but we meet her in several different stages. She's sort of an interesting character, even though she's sort of like romantic character. Like, she's just sort of the romantic character there to sort of be the love of the main guy, of Vesemir. But she is a little bit unique. The mage character here, who has a little bit of bigotry against the Witchers, she's a little bit more stereotypical, but she does, again, have a few good emotional beats that I really liked. Beyond her, everyone else feels fairly stock. There was no one that really particularly was like, oh, that's an interesting character that I really want to follow. There was no, Geralt character here. Geralt as a character is not very charismatic, yet he's interesting and intriguing to follow. Vesemir here, not really. He's the sort of standard, I'm a smarmy dude who likes to say funny things, and I have a little bit of a chip on my shoulder. Which is fine, kind of that Han Solo-esque kind of vibe to him, but he never really stands out in any particularly interesting way. And so that kind of goes against this movie. So ultimately, at the end of the day, what I will say for this film is, if you are a Witcher fan, if you are hungry for more Witcher in preparation for Season 2 of The Witcher, this will tide you over. It'll be a fun time, it'll get you back into that world, you'll enjoy the time that you spend here, you won't feel like you wasted your time. And I will say it was enjoyable to sort of step back into this world. If you're not a Witcher fan, I don't necessarily know if this is going to be worth it for you. If you're not someone who wants to sort of really be in that world, really cares about what The Witcher is, and you're just looking for something fun to watch, I don't necessarily know if this would be the recommendation I would give to you. This is more for if you're a fan of The Witcher, you're a fan of this world, you'll enjoy it, you'll like the little, it'll give you a little snack to wait on, but otherwise, I can't really give it a full recommendation. But for me, as someone who enjoys The Witcher, I had a good time with it. So ultimately, that's my review of Witcher Nightmare of the Wolf. What did you think of the movie? Did you enjoy it? Did you like it? Did you hate it? I'd love to hear all your thoughts down below. Are you excited for Season 2 of The Witcher? I'd love to hear that as well. Don't forget I have a Patreon page that you can help support me at. You can help subscribe to this channel or my main channel where I do more video essay stuff. All that's available right here. But beyond all of that, I hope that you, as always, live long and stay sexy.